In a mere 6 minutes, Jasmine Crockett, a tenacious black attorney, turned a federal courtroom into a battleground for truth, unraveling the facade of a powerful judge before the unblinking eyes of live television. Her actions sent shockwaves through the halls of justice, forcing the nation to confront a question. How did one woman transform a routine trial into a reckoning for those who believed themselves untouchable? The Western District Courthouse stood heavy with anticipation, its stone walls seeming to brace for the storm about to break. Jasmine Crockett walked its echoing corridors, her charcoal suit sharp against the muted tones of granite and oak. In her hands, she carried a dossier marked in stark red, State versus Lawson, misappropriation of public funds. She was no stranger to high-stakes cases. Her career had pitted her against hardened criminals and corrupt officials. But this morning felt different. The weight wasn't in the files she held, but in the name presiding over the trial, Judge Howard Gates. As she pushed through the courtroom's heavy doors, Jasmine's gaze didn't seek the jury or the gathered spectators. It locked onto Gates, seated high on his bench, his eyes cold and appraising. His stare wasn't one of impartiality, but of disdain, as if her very presence offended the sanctity of his domain. He offered no nod, no acknowledgement, only a raised brow and a glance at his watch, a silent challenge. "What right do you have to stand here?" Jasmine's throat tightened, not with fear, but with clarity. This wasn't just a courtroom, it was a fortress of entrenched power, built to protect men like Gates and his allies. Across the room, the defendant, Charles Lawson, a real estate tycoon with a fortune built on questionable deals, whispered to his attorney, his gold watch glinting as he toyed with it. He radiated confidence, exchanging a casual smile with a suited man near the prosecution's table, as if they were spectators at a predictable performance. Setting her files down, Jasmine noticed 3 reporters in the back row, their cameras adjusting to capture every moment. The trial was open to the public, and she knew her every move would be dissected. But it wasn't the cameras that caught her breath. It was an elderly woman in the gallery, her worn coat a stark contrast to the polished surroundings. A security guard had just reprimanded her for sitting in the wrong seat, her face crumpling in shame as she apologized. Nearby, a white man sprawled across his row, unchallenged despite his disruption. The disparity wasn't subtle. It was a deliberate signal of who belonged and who didn't. The doors thudded shut, sealing Jasmine inside. She straightened her collar, her eyes fixed on Gates, cloaked in his black robe but radiating bias. Anger simmered within her, not yet ablaze but a steady ember, fueled by the realization that today's fight wasn't only about Lawson's crimes. It was about confronting a system that thrived on silencing those who dared to challenge it. The stenographer's keys clacked, a metronome to the mounting tension, as the room braced for what was to come. Jasmine felt every eye on her, not with curiosity, but with a calculated scrutiny, as if they were waiting for her to falter. The defense attorney, an older man with a polished ease of privilege, tilted his head, sharing a knowing glance with Gates. The room felt staged, a theater where Jasmine hadn't been given the script. Gates tapped his file, his fingers deliberate, then spoke, his voice dripping with condescension. "Let's hope Miss Crockett doesn't intend to make a spectacle of this court," he said, his words slicing through the air. He didn't mention the case or her role as a prosecutor, just a dismissal that stung like a lash. Inside, Jasmine felt a sharp pang, not of doubt, but of recognition. This wasn't a trial, it was a gauntlet. And Gates wasn't a judge, but a gatekeeper of a system that favored men like him and Lawson. A quiet laugh rippled from the gallery, venomous but restrained, as if her presence was a joke they all shared. The clerk, the bailiff, even the spectators, they were part of this performance, their silence a tacit agreement to let power prevail. She scanned the room, searching for a hint of fairness, a face that didn't judge her before she spoke. But all she found were expressions carved in stone, indifferent to her purpose. Her grip tightened on her files, nails pressing into her palms, the pressure a reminder of battles she'd fought before, as a public defender against corrupt police, as a black woman navigating rooms where she was always the outsider. Today was different, though. The stakes weren't just personal, they were systemic. If she stumbled, it wouldn't just be her case that fell. It would be every hope she'd carried for justice. The silence grew oppressive, a prelude to the storm. Jasmine stood at a crossroads, the weight of expectation threatening to crush her. But she knew one thing: she wouldn't yield. She would fight, and she would ensure this day was remembered. Opening her file, she pulled out a document stamped by the state treasury, stepping to the podium with a calm that belied the fire within. The evidence was damning: budget sheets, wire transfers, records showing millions in taxpayer funds siphoned to Lawson Shell Company. Before she could speak, Gates interrupted, his voice sharp. "Numbers? Really, Ms. Crockett? Spare us the tedium." He didn't look at the papers, leaning back with a smirk, exchanging a glance with Lawson's attorney. Laughter bubbled from the back, louder now, as if she were a schoolgirl reciting a flawed essay. Jasmine's chest burned, not from his words, but from the room's reaction. The truth she held was dismissed, not for its merit, but because it came from her. She glanced at the jury, hoping for a spark of interest, but their eyes dropped, avoiding her. They wouldn't challenge a judge, especially not for a black woman prosecutor. The silence screamed louder than any insult. "You don't belong." Her hand shook, but her voice held steady. "Your Honor, this data, verified by 3 independent agencies, shows transfers double the approved amount to the defendant's company." Gates chuckled, not bothering to look. "A novel, Miss Crockett? Save it for the bookstore." The gallery snickered, the stenographer paused, her gaze cold. Lawson's attorney tapped his pen, amused, as if her evidence were a tired tune. The mockery wasn't just personal, it was an assault on justice itself. Gates spoke again, his tone venomous. "Do you think you can hide incompetence behind paperwork?" The words were a blade, not from an opponent, but from the arbiter of fairness. The defense attorney nodded smugly, a clerk stifled a laugh, and a man in the gallery muttered, "She's fresh out of law school, can't even read a report." No one rebuked him. Gates didn't flinch, his silence an endorsement. Jasmine stood rigid, the files heavy in her hands. Every stare tested her resolve, waiting for her to break. A woman whispered, "A black girl thinks she can win here." The words cut, not just for their cruelty, but for what they revealed. Her presence was an insult to their order. Gates piled on, his voice icy. "Ms. Crockett, this isn't a stage for your dramatics. Save the victim act." He wasn't questioning her case. He was erasing her legitimacy, and no one, not the jury, not the staff, objected. The air thickened with injustice, and for those watching, whether in the room or on screens, the weight was unbearable. Jasmine wasn't wrong. She was right, standing for truth in a place that treated it as an inconvenience. But she didn't waver. Her voice, when it came, was clear, unyielding. "Then let the evidence speak," she said, each word a defiance of their scorn. She wouldn't bend, not to their cruelty, not to their power. The room tensed as Jasmine opened another case, producing a contract between the city and Lawson's company. She placed it on the projector, her voice steady. This contract approved $12.5 million for redevelopment. But federal records show Lawson's company received $24.8 million. She flipped the page, revealing a transfer form signed by one name, Howard Gates. The signature glowed on the screen, undeniable, silencing the room. No one breathed, no one moved. The truth laid bare. Gates leaned forward, his nonchalance forced. "Invalid," he said, dismissing it without a glance. Jasmine pressed on. "This was obtained under subpoena, authenticated by the Justice Department." Gates snapped, "It's invalid because I say so." A whisper broke the silence. He signed it. But Gates tapped his gavel. "Move on." Jasmine's heart pounded, not with fear, but with outrage at the audacity. She presented the original document, stamped by 3 agencies, projecting it for all to see. Gates's signature stood stark, linked to a deal too perfect to be clean. He stared, then turned away, his voice cold. "Forged." No proof, no argument, just his word, as if his robe made it law. The room was a stage, and Gates was its director, erasing truth with a flick of his hand. A clerk laughed softly. A cameraman shifted focus to Lawson, who sat smugly, untouched. Jasmine's nails dug into her palms, but she didn't falter. Her gaze met Gates's, not as a prosecutor to a judge, but as a truth-teller to a liar. The audience felt it. The man on the bench wasn't upholding justice. He was burying it. Jasmine stood firm, her resolve a beacon in the storm. She activated a speaker, and Gates's voice filled the room, venomous and clear. "Keep that girl away from a ledger." The words struck like lightning, exposing his complicity. Pens dropped, reporters froze, the jury stirred. Gates's face paled, then reddened. "That's illegal," he shouted, but his voice cracked, his control slipping. Jasmine raised a warrant, her voice unwavering. "This recording is legal, authorized by the state, and verified federally." Murmurs grew, disbelief, realization. She played it again, make sure she never touches it. The truth was inescapable. Gates's own words damning him as an obstructor of justice. The facade shattered. Jasmine produced a transcript, each line stamped with official seals, and slid it toward the bench. Gates stared, his composure crumbling. He stood, slamming his gavel. "This trial is done," he roared, but it was a plea, not a command. Jasmine's voice cut through, calm but resolute. "You don't end this. The truth does." Her words shook the room, stripping Gates of his power. He stumbled, eyes darting for allies, but found none. Jasmine had done the impossible. She'd expose him, not with theatrics, but with unyielding truth. The silence was deafening, the air heavy with what had transpired. Gates was no longer a judge, just a man caught in his lies. Then the doors opened, and federal officers entered, their steps echoing like judgment. "Howard Gates, you're under arrest," one declared, listing charges: obstruction, abuse of power, embezzlement. Handcuffs clicked, their sound a verdict louder than any gavel. Gates stood frozen, his title meaningless, his head bowed, not in shame, but in defeat. No one protested as he was let out, his robe a mockery of justice. Jasmine watched, her face impassive, knowing this wasn't victory. It was a step toward repayment for years of silenced truths. The gallery watched, not with curiosity, but with awe, witnessing justice reborn not in robes, but in courage. The room's silence shifted as Charles Lawson stirred, his confidence gone, sweat beading on his brow. Jasmine turned to him, her gaze piercing. "You saw what happened to the untouchable," she said, sliding a document with his signature beside Gates's. "Your name's next unless you talk." Lawson faltered, his empire crumbling. "I need protection," he stammered, his voice a surrender. Jasmine nodded, placing a deposition form before him. "Give me the names," she said, knowing he was a thread in a larger web of corruption, politicians, executives, judges who'd twisted justice for profit. A week later, Jasmine stood before Congress, her black suit a symbol of solemn duty. The flag behind her waved, a reminder of justice's fragility. She set down her file, needing no notes. "I'm here not to recount a trial," she began, "but to say we cannot claim justice while judges sell it to the highest bidder." Her voice was clear, piercing the nation's conscience. The chamber stirred, faces reflecting pain, anger, hope. An elderly woman wept, a veteran clenched his fist, and slowly people stood, not cheering, but affirming, "We see you." Applause followed, heavy with tears, not for glory, but for shared rage at a system that had failed too many. "No one is above the law," Jasmine said, her words a vow. "If we want justice, we must build it with truth and the anger we've been taught to hide." The room felt it, a shift, not in policy, but in spirit, a society waking to its own power. In a Chicago apartment, an 8-year-old girl watched, her eyes wide. She didn't grasp every word, but she felt Jasmine's strength. Turning to her exhausted mother, a nurse fresh from a grueling shift, she whispered, "Mom, I want to be like her." The words were quiet, unheard by the world, but they carried a promise. The future would not bow. Across the nation, from Baltimore's single mothers to UCLA's law students, people saw it. Justice wasn't a system. It was a fight. Jasmine's stand wasn't just a trial. It was a spark, igniting minds long resigned to silence. Anger, guided, became purpose, and children of all colors began to dream of a world they could shape. Jasmine Crockett hadn't just won a case. She'd given voice to the voiceless, proving that truth, once spoken, could shake even the mightiest foundations. Her fight wasn't over, but it had begun, and it belonged to everyone who dared to listen. If this story stirs you anger, hope, or a call to act, know that justice lives in voices like yours. Share this tale, join the journey, and let's ensure the next chapter changes everything.